to go into missions. So there's a lot of history here. We're looking forward to having them come and share a little bit more about the Reaching and Teaching ministry, and trust that that'll be a blessing to your hearts. Peter, why don't you come and share with us?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Just to get the pastor shared a little bit about our background, our communication and relationship with Lex and Edie go back to 1980, which is really, that is a long time ago now. And we're just so thankful for how God just works in people's lives and ministries and moves them to ministries. And as we get older, we keep running into different people that we were in school with or candidate class with, and just seeing how God has worked in their lives and moved them to different ministries, and just that sovereign hand of God working. And that's always been a joy, and it's been good to get caught up with them a little bit. And we were up late last night talking too much this morning. We were late this morning, so all those things. But it's been good. Just give you a little bit of background on who we are, and then what we're going to do this morning is, in the Sunday school time here, it'll be a little more of a nuts and bolts of what we do, what our ministry looks like. The morning service will be sermon-based, but this will be a little more just really, what we do on our day-to-day, what the ministry is, our target with the ministry. So we'll explain all that in just a little bit. I was born, my personal testimony, I was born I'm a California kid, actually. And then when I was young, about just 9 going on 10, my father moved to Clark Summit, Pennsylvania, came on the faculty of Baptist Bible College, and he was the science and biology guy there, and did that for 30 years. So that's really where I grew up, and started our family there, and so God was good to us there. In 1988, we went to candidate class with ABWE, and 1993 arrived in Italy, and we were there in a church planting ministry for 10 years. Loved it, and God was just blessed and involved in a couple of church plants, and so we're so thankful for that opportunity God gave us to minister there. We actually had supporting churches in this area. We had supporting church, Medford, First Baptist in Medford supported us, over in Hainesport, and then what was the other one? Winslow over in Sicklerville. They were all supporting churches of ours. And so we know this area a little bit. We were kind of that Philly, Jersey kind of area. We spent a lot of time rummaging around in this area. So it's kind of good to be back in this area. Since 2003, we have been in Florida, missions pastor and wife at Faith Baptist Church in Winter Haven, Florida. Enjoyed it. Did some youth missions the whole time, but some youth, and we did some college and career. We did a lot of different things. And about 2 years ago, the Lord directed us towards this new ministry with Reaching and Teaching International Ministries, and we'll tell you all about that ministry. And it was an interesting move for us. We came back from Italy in 1993 to the States, in 2003 to the States, and we'd always talked about the opportunity, if God would give us the opportunity to get back into missions full time. And with our kids in the house and just all those things, the window of opportunity just wasn't there. And then a few years ago, the window opened up. So we were praying about it, and God directed us towards this ministry and just set some things in place very clearly. And so we've moved towards the ministry of reaching and teaching. Primarily what reaching and teaching does is we train indigenous pastors, and we'll explain a little bit more about that. So just a great opportunity God has given to us.
Is this on? Okay. So my grandmother was born in Camden, and my mother was born in Morristown, and that's where they lived all through my growing up years. And so I spent a lot of time down here in this area, and so it's interesting coming back here after so many years and seeing how the area has changed, and all the peach orchards are gone, and all of that is so different. But it was nice to be back in this area. Like Peter said, well, after we moved from here, we moved to northeastern PA. My parents were both teachers, and grew up on a very small farm there, and then went to BBC, and that's where I met Peter in high school, actually, but we were on the campus of BBC at a Christian school on that campus, and the Lord just used my relationship with Peter to certainly direct me to working in ministry and also into missions ultimately. So I just thank the Lord, like Lex was just mentioning, for the godly heritage that we both had, and ask him all the time to preserve that heritage and continue to communicate love for the gospel to our children. And we have 4 children. Our oldest is associate pastor in Indianapolis. Our son is in Tampa, works for Honeywell. Our daughter is married to a guy from, both our son and our daughter, our middle son and daughter, married people from within the church where we served. And she's in Korea for 2 years. We have 5 grandchildren, and so they're all over the place. And then our youngest daughter is attending Boyce College in Louisville, Kentucky, studying biblical counseling.
Okay. All right, we want to illustrate what Reaching and Teaching does, and we need some volunteers to begin. And since we know Jane a little bit, you're going to be one of our volunteers. Okay? All right? Okay? All right. I need 3 people to go outside those doors. This won't take very long. Just 3. But Jane, you need to come up here. You need to stay here. You get to stay. You stay with us. Yeah. Just, you can go out, okay? And then it doesn't have to be 3. It can be 2.
If we just had one more go outside,
okay,
that would be great. Awesome.
You guys don't have to do anything. It's all on Jane.
There's
so, okay?
coffee back there.
I know.
That's right.
I'm going to get them back.
Coffee and goodies, right?
Don't go out of the foyer area because they're gone. Okay. All right. So here's what's going to happen. Okay. So as you can see from the screen, I personally have found the cure for cancer. Okay? I'm going to eradicate cancer. Okay. All right? So here's what's going to happen. So we're going to conduct a little experiment, and so I found this cure for cancer, and here it is. All right? Here's what you have to communicate for cancer. Okay?
For the cure for cancer.
For the cure for cancer.
Okay.
Here's what it is. All right? You need to communicate this and communicate it well. All right? You ready? Okay. And you're going to have to tell these 3 people.
What to do.
No, you get no help. You ready? Okay, here's what you have to tell. Okay. We're gonna bring them in. You can say, I've got the cure for cancer. Here it is. You're taking that message of life-saving cure to these 3 people. Okay? Here's what you have to tell them. Put my glasses on for this. Okay. Communicate this. To cure cancer, here's what has to happen. On the 3rd Tuesday of the 2nd month, 7 years from right now, you need to eat 13 yellow beans, 4 green bananas, and 9 black olives. Then on the 4th Friday of the 7th month, 12 years from now, you wash all that down with 12 ounces of orange tea while spinning 3 times on your left foot as your right arm is extended above your head. Now, to guarantee the success of the cure, you need to sing Yankee Doodle Dandy in the key of C flat in the German language. Now, we're going to bring them in. I want you to go get them. No, you may not have this. I want you to go get them, bring them in, and communicate that to them. Thank you.
Go, my sisters, so that many may be healed. Go.
I was going to say, let her stay here, and somebody grab them.
Bring
Yes,
them
but
in.
she is the missionary. She is the
been sent.
missionary. She's been sent. So go, my
You
sister,
need to
that
go.
many may be healed, and share this
You've
message.
been a missionary. You know how to do this. So
So-
go.
Go and bring them in.
Get them, bring them back here. Come on in. You're the lost heathen. Sorry.
You are the lost sick.
You are the
That's
sick
right.
and lost. Come right up front here. Okay.
Yes.
And what has happened is, Jane, you tell them what you know.
Do we go anywhere special?
No,
just
no,
stand right
she's
here.
going to give you
She's
this
gonna-
message,
she's
this
gonna- she has
life-saving
a
message
life-saving
of
message for
cure.
you.
All right, make it good, Jane. Okay, I have the cure for cancer. You have to do what they say. One is, you have to eat a banana in 3 days. In 3 days. Okay.
No help, please.
No, you can help, but
Eat a banana in 3 days. You have to eat, olives, some olives.
And then in 12 days,
And then in 12 days, you have to do something else.
eat some more beans.
He won't give me the, he's a doctor.
you can't have it. Okay. All right. That's good. We won't.
Yeah, we won't.
We won't make you suffer anymore.
Around.
You spin around. That's right.
She's trying. We gotta let her at
Keep
least
going.
try.
Sing. I'm waiting for you to sing Yankee Doodle Dandy in German.
Yes, Yankee Doodle Dandy in German. You have to sing it.
4 green bananas
4 green
on the
bananas.
third
That's so
Tuesday.
great.
On the third Tuesday.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Awesome.
Very good. Okay. This is perfect. All right. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Thank you. Thank you
Yay.
to you all. Okay. Very good. Very good. All right. So, what we've really done with that ridiculous sermon, with the ridiculous
You
illustration-
illustrated it so perfectly, Jane. So thank you. That was
right.
awesome.
And we realize as with all illustrations, eventually they do break down. But the sobering reality is what we often do that same thing with pastors. That's happening with pastors around the world all the time. They have the truth. They're saved. They know the gospel, but they really don't have the ability to communicate it well, or they're not equipped to do that at any level. And so, as we have looked at missiologists talk about, they will explain just a little more. There are about 85% of the world's evangelical pastors and churches are led by pastors with minimal or no theological training. And we'll expand on that in just a minute. And that what that works out to is that in the United States, there's one trained pastor for every 235 people, which to me seems a little low, but that's really what it is. Bring that outside the United States, there's one trained pastor for every 450,000 people. Okay, and the key to that is trained pastors. Okay, not just having a pastor. It's not you got one pastor for that many people. You have one trained pastor who's ministering to those many people.
So missiologists give us these statistics as we break down all of the pastors in the world. So the 100% of the pastors in the world. These are the statistics that they're giving us. 5% of all the world's pastors have, and then we would clarify that by saying in evangelical churches, right? So churches, hopefully like ours, are pastoring after having some seminary, and that would be the ones that actually go to the building and sit down with a teacher and have seminary level training, right? 5%. Then the 10% have some kind of training, and we do know those organizations that will send out, do like what we're doing, possibly use online training or recorded MP3 player training, so some kind of training, right? So 10%. And then the remaining 85% with nothing. And we need to clarify too that when we're talking to missiologists and reading and finding out about, even just talking to missionaries, they're finding pastors that don't even know the basic Bible stories. Like, They hear the story of David and Goliath for the first time in our training. And yet they're pastoring a church because they know the gospel. And so it's interesting to watch you, Jane, when you were in that situation. You, of course, didn't remember some of the little details. Of course you didn't. It's very complicated. And so is Scripture, right? And so what did you do? You thought, oh, I'll just make it up. I'll try to grab a piece of that and at least give them something. And this is what we see the pastors doing, and that's called I lost the word, syncretism. You know, the syncretism, when you take what is truth and then add to it what you believe to be correct, just because you don't know or you can't remember, you're unsure of the truth. And so this is what we're seeing happen through the world.
I'm trying to illustrate it with or visualize it with the country of Ecuador. Our Reaching and Teaching really started, was founded by a missionary from Ecuador. And to illustrate really what we have here is we have illustrated with 5 churches throughout the country of Ecuador. And so we need to ask the question, say, do these churches practice sound doctrine? Do they read and study the Bible accurately? Is syncretism a reality? At least explain what syncretism is really just when we take different truths and kind of just bring them all together. And maybe folklore. And at least it was just in Ecuador about a week and a half ago, barely a week ago. And so you're in these mountain towns where there is folklore. And so, well, here's the pastor, and if he's untrained, that folklore becomes a part of their church culture and these types of things.
Which is very much alive in, I know we spent the years in Italy, and we saw so much superstition and so much combination of what may have been some grain of biblical truth, and then, but everybody knew the horoscope, and we even saw the symbols of astrology on some of the Catholic churches. It was carved in the walls of their churches. That was just, they just kind of mixed together things, because many times at the time people couldn't read, and so they just, which we still have today, which people don't always realize, but that was what was happening even then.
Yeah. And so these churches, these are the questions we need to ask. Are these healthy churches? And so, there's these questions that we have. So there we go. I'm going too fast. I got it. Okay, there we go. So there's question marks. So what is going on inside these churches? All right. So what happens with what our training method is, what we do is we will come in and establish a training site, usually most of the time in one of those churches. In the church, we get national leader on the ground who will logistically coordinate things for us, have the contact within his area, and will establish a training site. So what we do is we come in with a curriculum. We have a curriculum that is done over 3 years, 9 modules, 3 modules a year for 3 years. And so these churches, Lord willing, at the end, these pastors at the end of that 3 years, they'll be sound doctrine, they'll be reading the Bible and studying it accurately. Syncretism is reduced, that threat is, and they'll have a clear understanding of what the gospel is. And so then, from that point, what happens is those pastors, those indigenous pastors, they are now leading churches with sound doctrine and practice, and they're influencing those churches around them. So it's not we're just sending missionaries to go do it. Now we're training pastors to go reach their own churches and the other pastors around them. So because then you're sending pastors, these indigenous pastors who have the culture, they have the language, they understand the context of ministry in whatever country they happen to be in. And so that's the ministry paradigm for what we do. And it's unique in that we are focused on that 85% of the pastors who have little or no access to formal training. These might be pastors who are in mountain villages. They might be pastors who are They're really farmers, and then they pastor on a Sunday. They're the preacher in the church on the Sunday. And so when we go to do training, we need to build our training schedule around their harvest seasons, their planting seasons. So that's really that's our focus, those pastors who can't jump online and learn in that way. So that's really what our focus has been. All right, just so you get an idea of what this is the heart of Reaching and Teaching right here. Reaching and Teaching, we exist to reach the peoples of the world through evangelism and to respond to the great need for deep discipleship, pastoral preparation, and leadership training in theological education around the world. So that's what we do. That's what we do. We're going to talk a little bit more about how we do that in just a minute. The vision statement is Reaching and Teaching seeks to encourage all of God's people to go into all the world in order to faithfully obey all of the Great Commission. And that's the vision of what we do. Lisa will explain a little bit what that looks like.
Right, we have this kind of illustration. So it's Reaching and Teaching seeks to encourage all of God's people. So our desire is to not only go ourselves as staff members. There's 11, I guess it's 12 now, staff members on Reaching and Teaching's staff, but all of us are not global trainers. There are some that are doing other kinds of things. So I think there's maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 out of that would be actually going to help do this training. So in order to get this training done, we are trying to enlist churches to join with us. And that might be teams of 2 to 5, 6 people that would go on a 10-day trip with us. All right, so that's the first part of our vision statement, is that all of God's people will go into all the world, meaning we try to locate areas where we know that no training is being done, and that is difficult for the pastors in that area to get, whether it's because of economic issues or educational issues, to get some kind of training. So a lot of our training, or maybe, 70% of our training would be to remote areas where there is lower levels of education. All right, so we're trying to encourage all of God's people to go into all the world in order to faithfully obey all the Great Commission. And Peter's message actually this morning is on the Great Commission and the 4 parts of it. Okay, so we know it's go into all the world, right? And you're evangelizing, preach the gospel, right? Baptizing them. And then what's the final part? Teaching them, right? Teaching them. So that last part is often a part that we forget, that we need to do, or else we're not sending out ambassadors with the ability to share this life-saving message.
So, I'll skip the sermon time because it's done.
Sorry.
Wife, you know what it is. So how does this look within Reaching and Teaching? What's this look like? There's really 2 primary areas. You can see it there. First of all, we send career missionaries. We have 29 missionary families from Jordan to China to our largest group is in Central and South America. We just sent 2 couples to France. I'm forgetting probably another couple other countries, but so God has really blessed, and it's growing. And we just sent out 8 new missionary families just this past summer. We had 8 in our training, and 6 have gone, and 2 more are about to go. So we have career missionaries. And these missionaries, what they're doing is they're evangelizing, they're training, and then they're establishing local churches. And what's something that's unique within Reaching and Teaching is we don't have our missionaries pastor churches. They'll come alongside a national pastor, because we feel very strongly that, in fact, one of our missionaries who's in a closed country, he has an opportunity to be a teaching pastor within an established church, and even that was a bit of a stretch for us, because we really stress, let's get the national pastors trained, and we're not coming in to replace them. We're not coming in to start our own church. We're coming in to help establish and strengthen the churches that are already there. That's what our DNA is. And so that's very, very important to us. We also facilitate and lead short-term training trips. And this is really how Reaching and Teaching started. There's training trips to see the need for pastoral training was recognized, and the training trips were going, and we provide a curriculum, and ideally that a curriculum happens 3 times a year for 3 years, and then that training is complete. And I can give you the scope and sequence of that. I've got some copies of that if you want to see what that looks like. And then, yeah.
How was that curriculum created?
That was created within our within the mission, and what it does is I got some stuff I can show you, but it's kind of a 3. There's a spiritual portion, there's a doctrinal portion, then there's a practical portion to that. And so what that looks like is the training happens for a week. There's a minimum of 30 hours of training a week, usually more than that. And so there's time spent in the morning on the spiritual portion. Like, for instance, I was in Brazil about 2 months ago, and the spiritual portion was just personal worship. What's that look like? This is for the pastor's personal relationship with God. So there was time spent every day. That was the beginning portion of the day. And then Christian doctrine, that happened to be the module we were in. So the bulk of the teaching and training was just on Christian doctrine, what that is. It was salvation, regeneration, everything, all that. And then the final portion was the shepherding God's flock, what that looks like as a pastor. What does that mean? What's the practicalities of that? So every module has those 3 elements in it: the spiritual, the doctrinal, and that practical portion. But I'll give you some of that information. It's very interesting. Then the last thing we do is, that facilitating and leading short-term training trips, we do probably in the 50-some training trips a year to different countries, and we help set those up, and we can give you more detail on that as well. And then we train and mobilize churches to participate in those short-term training trips. And so it would be, for instance, we would say, your church. So, we'd like to go do one of these training trips. So, okay, here's the module they're teaching, and we would say, we do the logistics for it, and then here's what you need to teach, and it's usually teams of 2, 3, 4. You get bigger than that, and it gets a little clumsy. Normally, our training trips, we're not painting buildings, we're not doing that kind of stuff, which those things are good to do, but that's not what we do. And we will do that as an ancillary part of a trip, like when Lisa was just in Ecuador, they did that, but it's not why we do our trips. And so our focus is really on the pastoral training, and really focus on that quite a bit. So like I said, we send career missionaries, and that's my biggest the role, but most of my responsibility falls in, and there's two of our couples. And
I just want to jump in here and say, as I'm looking at their pictures too, we've discovered, just as we were, kind of asked to come on to this mission and work with this, we started looking at the missionaries and their backgrounds and their preparation, and almost, I would say, 85 to 90% of them have masters of theology and are working on a doctorate in theology. So these are prepared men and women, and their focus, again, is pastoral preparation. It's not that we are contrary to sending out missionaries to do evangelism and church planting. It's not that. It's just that we see this other hole, let's say, in our missiology as American believers that can help and can do something to help, to stem the tide of need that's going on here. This is our niche, right? And we're sending out prepared leaders, prepared missionaries for this particular thing, and that just blesses my heart. And so then we facilitate and lead the short-term training trips. And as Peter said, this involves taking a team of 3 to 5 men. Just as a side note, and we're going to talk a little bit more about our roles, but my role is a developmental role in that they have begun to see that pastors' wives are coming to these. I don't think there's one in, oh yeah, is that the ponytail of the wife of that guy? I think so. Anyway, the wives are starting to come to these things too. And this brings up a whole other, I mean, we're doing so much talking right now about how to handle training for the missionary or the pastor's wives, because as you can understand, if you've got a pastor that's getting trained, his wife is still either largely uneducated, meaning she can't read, or she has some ability to read but has never gone past maybe the 8th grade. And pretty much her role has always been relegated to, not that it's I shouldn't put my hand down. I mean, she's got the high role of being a mother and a worker in the kitchen and all of that. But in terms of helping to mentor the women in her church, she's entirely ill-equipped. And so, again, we have this problem of, women they're passing on ideas and teaching that is not right. Or even just that she's unable to help her husband support him in the ministry. And I mean, Edie, I know you can understand how important your role is in the body of Christ. There's women in that body. And so that's going to be my role, is to begin this process of developing trips where women can come along and help myself. And there's one other woman that's on the staff now. And we can provide, alongside of the training for the pastors, we can provide, it's probably going to be smaller groups, because we're discovering that the pastors are saying, if I go to the training, my wife has to take care of the farm, and she's got to be at home taking care of that. So we're trying to work out logistically how we can make this happen. But anyway, that's going to be my role.
What time do I need to be done? Don't say now. 5, 10 minutes. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, we'll go fast. All right. All right. I've talked about this a little bit already. This is kind of a glance at what our curriculum looks like, the spiritual part, biblical part, and the methodological, just the training, how that looks in real life for the pastors. And so each module in the training has these 3 elements in it.
We usually have brought the book that we have used with us, but it's being reprinted. Yeah, it's being revamped. So we're even hesitating on using its original title as well. Yeah. So, because it did have a little catchy title, but it's being rewritten, and it's going to include even some things for women in it. And so, yes, you need a curriculum. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and it's been written. In the way the curriculum was written, it was written to be contextualized well, written for different cultures. And but yeah, we can talk about that a lot more, but the clock on the wall says we can't. All right, here's a little video that explains a little bit about what we've talked about, and hopefully this is going to work like a charm. We tried it before, and it worked great. There we go.
working as subsistence farmers or factory workers struggling to support their family. Perhaps they've received nothing more than a high school education, if that. The question is not, Do these type of brothers need training? The question is, how do we get them the training that they so desperately need? We cannot be satisfied with mere gospel presence in these locations. The missions effort is not finished until there are healthy churches established, led by capable, qualified, and equipped pastoral leadership who are then able to teach others also. Reaching and Teaching is seeking to meet this global need in at least two key ways. We send short-term teams to the field to teach modular courses to brothers, seeking to develop their heart, their head, and their hands, the whole person, for gospel ministry. We're also a sending agency for long-term missionaries, investing their lives overseas, reaching people with the gospel, and teaching national and indigenous pastors for gospel effectiveness. It's been amazing over the last 3 years to see the Lord grow the ministry. Back then, there were 4 short-term training centers. Now there are 15 training centers spread across Latin America and the Caribbean, and even now into Africa. Back then, there were 6 career missionaries on our roster, and I'm thrilled to tell you now that we have 24 missionary families spread across the world, stationed in strategic locations in South America and the Middle East and East and South Asia. Our stateside staff has also tripled. We've got a team of capable brothers and sisters working hard to both support and facilitate the work of the ministry abroad. In fact, it's become increasingly evident to us that without a strong, effective, and stable stateside staff, we simply could not pursue the opportunities for the gospel that the Lord has given us across the world. Would you prayerfully consider partnering with Reaching and Teaching both in prayer and financial support? All of our staff and missionaries stand on the shoulders of God's people who generously give of what the Lord has given them to propel the gospel through our respective roles. It's our desire at Reaching and Teaching to see all of God's people go into all the world, faithfully obeying all of the Great Commission. I hope you'll join us as we seek to fulfill our mission, our King's commission to reach and teach the nations.
Just want to very quickly just go through our roles, and we'll wrap it up here very quickly. My role at Reaching and Teaching is Director of Missionary Services, and that is a role that it's multifaceted. Boil it down to 5 bullet points here. It's direct oversight of missionaries from appointment to deployment, bringing them into the mission, make sure they get trained correctly, making sure their support level is what it needs to be, getting them out and healthy and on time, and with all the visa issues, all those things. That's part of that. The language study. Also, I need to update the video. The video is not that old, but we're growing so quickly. We have 29 missionary families. I think he said 24. We have 29 now, and our training sites were over 20 of those as well. So those are growing all the time. And just the best way to do is just jump on the website and see where all the training sites are. We have training sites where we don't have career missionaries, and we can explain more of that later. I also oversee missionary language study, liaison between the home office and our field team leaders, wherever they may be. And then, you can read the rest of it. And then we just assist in missionary and church partnership recruitment. So we do a lot of different things. There's more than that. That's the bullet point of what I do. Bullet points of what I do.
And like I said, I'll be developing those trips, integrating the curriculum with helping to do that. We've got somebody that's working with Lifeway, and he just actually attended the trip to Tambo, Ecuador. Just a couple weeks ago, he was there just researching and trying to figure out the ways we can revamp that. And then looking for future sites. We're talking to missionaries that are, we work with other, like ABWE missionaries or missionaries with other organizations that are on the field and saying, listen, we're here doing this church planting, but we don't have anyone to train. So can you guys come along and help us with that part of it? And so we do work with other like-minded, of course, missionaries on the field. So we're talking to India, we're talking to Haiti, a lot of other places for even just the women's ministry. So I'm working with that. And then also mobilizing, which is recruitment, basically. And I do have a partner that works with me. She's a 30-year-old young lady that is that's her primary role, but I'm just kind of supporting her and helping to recruit women to be involved.
Revelation 7:9 says this, "After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes and with palm branches in their hands." And it goes on about salvation belongs to our God. And that's the goal that should be the role of every believer in Jesus Christ. That's the finish line that we look forward to. And as we were explaining this to Pastor and Edie last night about this, the whole, as we'd been in missions a long time ago. And, it's been 15 years since we were missionaries before. And then the Lord directed us to this new ministry, and it was a missionary status role. We had to raise support, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to. And the role was perfect.
The Lord said, yes, you will.
Everything, and so, but God had to change my heart in several ways. And I had to battle some pride. I had to battle a lot of those things. But one of the things God used is bring along this. This is really pulled from a book called The God Ask. And again, I could talk about this for a long time. But basically what that does, and it changed my view, and I like to share it because it helps us understand our role in this whole process as those seeking support, as those involved in supporting others. What's our role in that? What's all that look like? So this finish line of all people praising God, saying salvation belongs to our God, that's the finish line. Then God, who is the giver of all, He provides everything, from our clothes to our money to our food to everything, to everything we have is from God. So as ministry workers, this would be us, we're down in the bottom left corner, we're asking God to provide. Any missionary does this. We've all done it. And so we ask God, can you please provide so we can do the work of the gospel ministry? And then we've got the potential ministry partners who say, God, you have given us some resources. We want to invest for kingdom work. How do we do that? How do we do that well? And what's the best opportunity to do that? So we as ministry workers, we ask God for provision. The ministry partners, they're asking God for direction from God, how to do that. So we come into a situation to where we're not asking people to support what we do. We invite people. We say, come in, be a part of what God is doing through the ministry of reaching and teaching. And so that really helped us in our mindset as we come into churches and approach individuals and get engaged with them, what that whole process is. And it just changed our thinking in that whole process. And God just really blessed it, and we're so thankful for that. I'm sorry, this is just worked in. This is what kind of a missionary would we be without putting this up? This is just kind of where we're at, and we're about 6% of what we need. Trusting a little over. Actually, we just picked up the last few weeks, actually. So God's probably closer to 70%, actually. So we've got a long story behind it. Why we raised support for a while, had to stop it, take care of Elisa's parents, some health issues, and we just kind of restarting that support raising process. And Lord willing, we'll get that done here within the next couple of months. So anyway, God's blessed, and we're just thankful for the opportunity that God has given to us. Thank you for allowing us to be here. And quick question. Okay, all right, we're going to be late, but it's not my fault.
That's right. A question regarding the short-term
Yeah.
missions. From what I understand, this is lay people from the churches who are going in a teaching position. I'm curious about what preparation they have to be
Right.
teachers, and also language issues.
Right. We do have a kind of an application process so that obviously, and I'm sure you can understand this, it has to be sort of a vetting process. We do ask people to apply, and then we can go back to their church and say, okay, this person has said they're willing to do this. Are they equipped? Do they already teach in the church? And then we do give the curriculum that's already prepared. And then we have a kind of an orientation to the whole process that we go through with them. There's a couple, I think there's at least one book to read and go through. So we do have to know a number of months in advance. And I'm on the short-term trip development team, and I know they're even tightening up that process as we're moving, as we grow. So, it isn't just like sign on a piece of paper and there you go, right? We're trying to make this intentional and use people that are equipped to do this
Right,
work.
yeah, and ideally what we would like is churches would adopt a training site. And so it is, you would have the same people from, well, at least people from within a church going to that site. So there's a familiarity with it, there's a relationship with it. And so they know, okay, here's the module, here's the next module we're teaching, that's going to be taking place. For instance, I was in Cuiabá, Brazil in end of August, taught module 3. Well, we're going back in November. Well, that's module 4. So I'm going back, but I'm going with 2 other men and who are pastors and a Sunday school teacher. So we don't just take anybody on these trips.
Right. We're trying to keep a continuity even,
Yeah.
so that at least there's one person that's familiar with that site. And as well,
Translators.
there's translators.
Yeah.
And again, this is a great emphasis of ours. We just spoke about this even just when we were in Tambo, how important it is for us to get consistency among our translators and make sure that they are like-minded as well. Because you can't, it's one thing to just translate the words, but, ideas and concepts are also translated. So it's very important that we even vet, if you want to use that term, vet them to make sure that we are like-minded with them. Yeah.
Yeah, good question.
Real quick, what are your governmental obstacles?
Oh, you name it, we got it. Yeah. Visas are for our career missionaries, short-term trips is usually not a problem. You can get, you're just kind of in and out, and it's less complicated with them. It's complicated, but less complicated for our missionaries going in. We've just gone through, visas are becoming more and more difficult to acquire. And so we've got missionaries that go to Ecuador. Do you go on a tourist visa, and do you change that? You go in with a professional visa, but you're not really a professional. But so it's visas are the main thing. Yeah.
We also do have, though, just in terms of, okay, well, we're going to have question and answers later.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah,
maybe
can do it.
address
Yeah,
those
yeah.
things later.
Yeah, we need to be done.
They're used to really good Italian food and things. We're going to give them a hot dog meal after. So they get to eat first, and then while they're working on their digestion and all of that, we're going to let you guys ask them questions. They're going to get more questions? Yeah, right? Alka-Seltzer, no. So if you've got more questions, save them for then. You'll have a casual, interactive time then during the meal after the service, and be able to ask them a lot of questions. This is a unique ministry, but it's a ministry that is critical. You can see the Apostle Paul's writings and trace the very philosophy that they're engaging now globally. The Apostle Paul, one of the first books of the Bible he wrote was the book of Romans. Why? Because he wanted to establish a church that had not yet had training to help them theologically understand what Christ had done for them personally. He wrote the pastoral epistles so that he could train the pastors in a practical way. I write this so that you might know how you ought to act within the church of God. So the Apostle Paul had the very same philosophy, and then a lot of the writings of the New Testament certainly was about the pastor's relationship with the Lord as well, and his spiritual walk and all of those things. So you see the very thing happening here with that. And even that the synchrony that they're talking about, we have full religions now that were probably born out of the spread of the gospel back in that day, but they didn't have the opportunity to have the Bible spread with it, so it was just an oral tradition of handing down the gospel of Christ that eventually, over long periods of time, actually translated into different religions that all have the idea of a worldwide flood, that all have the idea of a redeemer that would come someday and redeem them back from the corruption and the hardships that the world has. So what they're trying to do is to help mitigate that translation of truth that gets twisted and turned over long periods of generations into things that then eventually miss the gospel. and instead they want to preserve the gospel and the teaching of the Word of God. And of course, now we have technological means to put the Word of God in people's hands and the training coupled with it. Even pastors stateside, many pastors will get together and I mean, I had the privilege of one of my deacons in Alaska now pastoring a church in Alaska. Some of you met Pastor Holly, who is doing that. And pastors have the opportunities now to mentor people. This is a program that's developed to enable pastors globally to do that and to put other men that are trained, that have that foundation in the ministry. And I appreciate the fact they don't just teach them how to be pastors, they teach them about their spiritual lives and their relationship with the Lord as well. They heard the gospel. They might have been the first people in their village to hear the gospel, so they became the pastor. And yet they don't even know a lot of the basic things that culturally might be accepted that might not be acceptable in the Word of God. And so to teach them to understand that personal walk as well. So thank you for sharing. And we look forward to hearing more from